Having been trained as a strengths-based case manager all those years ago, I had a lot of other social workers I've run into over the years have a paradoxical problem of having a problem with the word problem. This chapter is about problem formation in research. Being strengths-focused doesn't mean that we have our blinders on when it comes to problems. We all know problems exist, and when we are talking about problems in the context of problem formation, when it comes to research, we are focused on solutions. The problem is we don't know what the solution is, and we can't get to the solution until we fully understand the thing that we are researching. Slide 2. In this lecture, I will talk a little bit about the idea of problem formation, various purposes of research, how to go about selecting a research topic and research question, the important part of research practice, narrowing your topics into research, my axe to grind on literature reviews, the concept of time, how it relates to research projects, and the important, if sometimes confusing, concept of unit of analysis. Slide 3. Here we see the author speak in my language. Social work and research and social work practice are exceedingly familiar. When we conduct research, we try to wrap our minds around what is the problem we need to answer. And similarly, when doing direct social work practice, we must first understand the client's problem. We need to know something about their context, etc. In both instances, we find strategies to solve problems. We articulate and implement a chosen path to problem solving. We then evaluate how well we've done, and we disseminate our findings, even if it's only making notes in a chart in the case of social work practice. Slide 4. The 5 basic types of research outlined in the text are fairly self-explanatory by their names. When we have very little understanding about a topic or a phenomenon, we often engage in exploratory research. Maybe we notice that the socioeconomic, racial, and ethnic makeup of the population we are serving in our agency doesn't match what is going on in the community around us. So we select to devise a strategy to understand basically what is going on. Descriptive research could be a subset of exploratory or explanatory research project. Maybe we are describing the characteristics of our client population. What is their race, their ethnicity, their diagnosis or social problem, gender, etc. Explanatory research, on the other hand, assumes that we have a good idea of what is going on within a well-defined phenomenon or situation, and we want to understand why something is happening the way it is. Perhaps we have several of our case managers who have amazingly outstanding outcomes. Why is it that it is something the clients they happen to have? Is it something in the qualities of the case managers themselves? Are they doing something different that the other case managers are not? There are a variety of ways we can conduct explanatory research. We can do it through statistical analysis. We can do it through qualitative research projects. Evaluation research, probably mostly what we will do as professional social workers, will be evaluation research. To the programs we work in, do they do what they are intended to do? Is my own practice effective? Does adding a 2-week module to our 8-week substance abuse program cause sufficiently better outcomes that we want to incorporate that intervention system-wide? And finally, the fifth purpose of research the authors describe is the construction of measurement instruments. Psychometrics is a specialized area of research, but it is something we should not be afraid of. Constructing measurement instruments requires us to have a good command of spoken and or written language and enough basic understanding of statistical process to determine that the constructs that we are developing instruments to measure are truly being measured by that instrument. Slide 5. The selecting of a topic to study and specific research questions is often a challenge for students and some seasoned researchers. What is it that we really want to know? Usually, it's a process that starts with us looking at either our agencies or our individual practice and letting that be our guide. Does our agency confront a decision because of some dramatic change, for example, extreme budget cuts? How is it that we can use research to decide strategically where to cut services or the provision of resources? Sometimes we just need information to make policy and planning decisions. For example, the growing Spanish-speaking population in Kansas City raises concern about equity in the provision of services. While it may seem fairly straightforward to rely on census data to understand the level of Spanish-speaking population, does the census give us a depth of information that we can know whether or not Spanish-speaking population within our service catchment area speaks well enough to receive mental health services or substance abuse services or a variety of other services that require a deeper understanding of English than it does to take a service job in a restaurant? This does not to imply that Spanish-speaking people only find themselves in service jobs, but it does reflect the reality of a lot of migrants when they first arrive. Whatever it is we decide we want to study, and whatever our specific question or questions are with our research projects, it should be something that produces knowledge that is relevant to social welfare programs, or demonstrating that what we are doing is solving or alleviating social problems. Slide 6. For the longest time since I've been in the research business, I have relied on the metaphor of the funnel to describe what is going from ignorance to knowledge, from being witless to having wisdom. We know we use the funnel to narrow things down to fit into a smaller opening. Like that, we take the large universe of unanswered questions or things that make us curious, and we will begin to funnel them down into social work research. First, we start with deciding what our topical area is in some way that is pretty wide. For example, we want to know what is the prevalence of substance abuse problems within our region, say the Kansas City area. That is a wide-ranging topic. We can narrow that topic first and foremost by deciding what is our personal interest. That might seem a little bit selfish, narrowing based on our personal interest, but it does make sense. The nature of conducting research projects is that they can be kind of lonely business. And when you're conducting research projects in agencies around the area, and you're kind of doing it in addition to your regular job of being a clinician or a case manager or an administrator, you will find that you have to fit it in here and there. If it is something that you're not at all interested, it will be hard to maintain the dedication to get the project completed. However, if it's something that you have a passion for, you will find yourself being curious about your research, and that will drive you to completion. All that said, we cannot forget about what our agency needs to know. The agency is, after all, paying our salary. We don't want to forget about our obligation to the agency. Once we have decided that our research topic has sufficient personal interest that we will continue on with it, and that it is something that the agency needs to know, we must ask ourselves, is it feasible? By feasibility, we mean a lot of different things. First and foremost, do I have the skills to do this? If I want to answer a question that requires complex statistical analysis, and I have not had the kind of training, I will have to hire somebody who does. Will my agency pay for that? Similarly, complex qualitative studies require exacting research methods. Have I been trained? They also take a lot of time. Will my agency give me release from some of my other duties in order to conduct a research project? If I am in school and doing this for a class project, will I have enough time to do this for the deadline? A question that you can also ask yourself when you are in an agency. Policy and practice relevance are pretty self-explanatory. That it doesn't make a lot of sense to spend a lot of time and energy on studying an irrelevant question. Finally, towards the bottom of the funnel, we see the literature review. Sometimes you start reading literature when you are further up the funnel to decide feasibility or agency need, or even policy and practice relevance. But before we move too deeply into a research project, unless we're doing a specific type of research called grounded theory, we want to do a thorough review of the research in order to fully understand the parameters of our topic, and also to find out maybe our question has already been answered. Finally, when you have completed all the steps, we arrive at a research question. Slide 7. What makes for a good research question? Each year that I've taught research, I have had several students who want to answer the grand question of what's it all mean and everything. Actually, I exaggerate. But it is real easy when you get into a research question to start off into a research project to begin to make your research question larger than you are able to manage. A good research question is specific, to try to answer as few questions as possible with each project. It is easy to fall into the trap of, well, I'm going to be sending out surveys anyway, I might as well ask about everything under the sun. Bad idea. The good research question has more than one possible answer. If you know that it has only one answer, then you probably already know that answer already, so why do the research? Research questions are only of value when they can be answered by observable evidence. Now, what constitutes observable? That's up for debate. Good social work research addresses practical problems that help agencies and individual practitioners meet the needs of clients or work more effectively, efficiently, or equitably. And again, our research should strive to have implications for social work policy or practice. We don't tend to seek knowledge for knowledge's sake, but rather we tend to seek knowledge to answer specific problem situations or conditions. Slide 8. Back to feasibility. When I think back to the evaluation project that I conducted at the Mental Health Center of the implementation of the DBT program, if I would have thought too much about feasibility ahead of time, I might not have thought I would have been able to pull it off. And I had a lot less research training than you will have had when you graduate from UMKC School of Social Work. If you have to do a research or evaluation project in your future, I think you will be surprised at how competent you will actually be. Locate a good research text, a basic one such as Rubin and Babbie, and you will be fine. Fortunately, when I conducted that project, I had a narrowly defined scope. I had a personal interest, and while the Mental Health Center did not afford me any additional time out of my schedule to complete the project, they were cooperative in the sense that they gave me access to the data that I needed. The financial costs were not an issue. I was being paid to work at the Mental Health Center. The data was made available to me at no charge, and I had a desktop computer with Microsoft Excel installed, and that enabled me to conduct the requisite statistical analysis. Ethically, how could I say no? I believed at the time, and I continue to believe, that there were political motivations for wanting to disprove the effectiveness of the CSS DBT program. Since the study participants were all clients and I was relying on data that already existed, the project in fact was exceedingly feasible. Slide 9. Continuing on with my discussion of my DBT evaluation at the Mental Health Center, it would have been much more difficult process had I tried to take it on alone. Most importantly, obtaining feedback from colleagues helped me to clarify what I needed to look out for in the data. The other people who were working with our borderline clients who were in our DBT program had an idea of what was going on with them, so they clarified the questions I needed to ask of the data. Since I was more clinically focused, I might not have thought to include data about vocational activities such as work or work training. However, by discussing my project with others within the Mental Health Center, they pointed out that they believed the borderline patients had improved markedly following implementation of the DBT program. By interacting with others, I was also able to become quite clear about the political nature of the evaluation. It became clear to me who in the organization had a vested interest in maintaining a vibrant DBT program and those who wanted to maintain or go back to a status quo that was familiar, but at the same time questionable in its effectiveness. Slide 10. Literature reviews. This is an area of the research project that I have become increasingly impatient with students about. The first line, literature review is an ongoing process, needs to be taken seriously. You can do a minimal review of the literature, just enough to get started, to develop your problem into a focused research question. You can understand how the research problem has been approached before, therefore you may learn conceptual and practical obstacles to being successful. You might find that you are able to build on the research that already exists. It seems as though that is where students have stopped in the past. In the past, I've had a freestanding literature review assignment. Currently, I am having a literature critique assignment. One of the most common mistakes that students make is that they believe that listing studies from journal articles with a brief review of each article is a literature review. It is not. When you cite an article in a literature review such as Smith and Jones and write a sentence or two or a whole paragraph on what that article says, then you continue on and write a paragraph based on Franklin 2012, followed by Johnson 2006, etc., you're not doing a literature review. That would be called an annotated bibliography. Literature reviews that appear in research reports are integrated. The focus of the literature review isn't the literature, it's the topic, and how does the literature support our understanding of the state of knowledge about a particular topic. Slide 11. The understanding of time as it is used in studies is important mostly when you consume research to help you understand a particular problem. Unless you are primarily a researcher yourself, you will probably only do cross-sectional studies. A cross-sectional study is often called a one-time snapshot study. You distribute however many surveys you were conducted, however many interviews that you are capable of, and you describe the attributes of that particular group of people at that particular point in time. The other three time dimensions mentioned in this slide, the cohort study, the trend study, and a panel study, have similarities and important differences. A trend study will study how a phenomenon changes over time by studying comparable individuals. So if, as in this slide implies, you study a group of people in 1990, you would then compare them to another group in the year 2000. You would compare, as in this example, the 41 to 50-year-olds with the 41 to 50-year-olds in your 2000 study. Now, if it was a cohort study, instead of a trend study, you would compare the 41-year-olds and 50-year-olds with a group of people who they would have become in this case, it would be a group of 51 to 60-year-olds. However, and this is the primary difference between a cohort study and a panel study, the cohorts could be different. A panel study follows the same individuals across time. A notable example of this is the National Health and Nutrition Study called the NHANES for short. That study is freely available to most researchers online. In a nutshell, what the study does is it randomly selects a group of people, conducts extensive interviews around diet and lifestyle issues, hauls them off to a medical facility, does a comprehensive battery of tests, and then sends them back into their life. At some point in the future, say 2 years or 5 years or 10 years, they find that group of people and invite them back into the medical facility and take a comprehensive battery of tests and participate in exhausting interviews about their lifestyle, nutrition, etc. This way they are comparing individuals at one point in time with the same individuals at another. Sometimes people are followed over very many years. One study in England has followed the same group of children over the course of their entire lives, many of whom have now retired. Slide 12. When developing a research model, you'll often run into the question of what is your unit of analysis. You may have several units of analysis to answer in your question. Let's say, for example, you want to understand how diversity is expressed in social work practice in your community. You might have all 3 units of analysis coming to bear to understand this question. You might develop research instruments where you interview or send questionnaires to individuals, practicing social workers, clients of social workers, significant others to clients of social workers, etc. You might also develop some mechanism to understand diversity from the point of view of different groups. You may do focus groups with social work teams. You may look at families as a whole instead of as a collection of individuals. And within the example of diversity, you may look at doing focus groups with people from different races who use social work services, or as the example here indicates, congregations if you're interested in understanding religious diversity. And finally, the unit of analysis might be some social artifact. Do agencies have diversity policies that we can analyze? What is said about diversity in their newsletters? What indicators of diversity exists within their building, etc. Slide 13. In this example, the unit of analysis is countries, not individuals. Therefore, the conclusion cannot be drawn from this observation. The ecological fallacy occurs when a researcher erroneously draws conclusions about individuals based on the examination of groups or other aggregations. That is why our emphasis on understanding the unit of analysis is vital. If we are studying a phenomenon using archival data, or if we are studying groups, we might misinterpret the answer to your question. Slide 14. Economic reductionism means explaining all or most human behaviors in terms of economic factors. Psychological reductionism means explaining all or most of human behavior in terms of psychological factors. These are 2 examples of reductionism. There are many possibilities.